My name is Alara, and the scent of smoke is a memory etched into my soul. It's not the comforting aroma of a hearth, but the acrid, choking ghost of a past that ended in searing pain and the shriek of tearing metal. It is the memory of my death. I died on a Tuesday. My half-sister, Saraphina, in a fit of jealous, twisted rage, had grabbed me, her fingers like talons in my arm, and kicked over the canister. The world didn't go dark. It turned blinding white, then an agonizing orange. The last thing I knew was the sensation of coming apart. I blinked and the world reassembled. I was standing in my childhood bedroom, the silk of my bridesmaid's dress cool against my skin. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of gardenias from the massive arrangements downstairs. Today was Seraphina's wedding day. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. It wasn't a dream. The phantom pain of disintegration was too vivid, too real. I had been blown apart, and yet here I was. I descended the grand staircase, a mask of calm over my roaring internal chaos. The manor was a whirlwind of activity, but I moved through it like a ghost. I needed to find Sarah, to see her face, to understand. I found her in the sun-drenched conservatory, being fussed over by a team of stylists. She was a vision in her custom-made, obscenely expensive gown, a creation of ivory silk and seed pearls that had been flown in from a different continent. But her eyes, when they met mine in the reflection of the vast gilt mirror, they were not the eyes of a nervous bride. They held a cold, calculating gleam, a knowledge that far exceeded her 22 years. A smug, vicious little smile played on her perfectly painted lips. "Alara," she cooed, her voice a saccharine mockery of sisterly affection. "Don't you look adequate?" The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying final certainty. She wasn't just preening. She was gloating. She had done it. She had slept with Kale, the brilliant, impoverished scholarship student our family had been sponsoring for years. She had thrown her future with the formidable Julian Thorne, a man of immense wealth and chilling reputation, to the winds. And she had done it knowingly. In our previous life she had rushed headlong into the arms of wealth, marrying Julian. I, moved by Kale's earnest promises and hard-working facade, had chosen him. It was the greatest mistake of my life. A life that ended in a ball of fire. Julian Thorne, behind his serious, refined exterior, was a monster. His basement wasn't a wine cellar. It was a dungeon. For 2 years I was his legal toy, chained, tortured, and broken. When his empire crumbled due to his own vices, he took his rage out on me before his creditors finally chased him down. The day Sarah ran into me, already the wife of the man who would eclipse all others, a man I found after my escape, she couldn't bear it. Her envy was a physical force that ended us both. And now she had been reborn with that knowledge. She had sabotaged her own wedding to force me into the gilded cage she had escaped. "Now it's my turn to be the billionaire's wife," she whispered, leaning close as if to adjust my necklace. Her breath was hot against my ear. "You go be that pervert's plaything." The confirmation was a cold splash of water. The rage that had defined the end of my first life was gone, burned away in the very fire she started. In its place was a chilling, focused clarity. He thought she was sending me to my doom. She didn't know the crucial, catastrophic flaw in her plan. Kale would never become a billionaire. He was a leech, a master manipulator who knew how to play the part of a promising young man, but his ambition was a hollow shell. Without me, without my family's full support and my own later interventions, he was nothing. The ceremony, of course, was a disaster. It was Julian Thorne himself who kicked open the bedroom door, his face a granite mask of fury. The gasps of the guests behind him were a symphony of scandal. I squeezed into the room and saw them. Sarah and Kale, naked and entangled on the rumpled sheets of the marital bed. The sight was less shocking than it was pathetic. My father's face turned the color of old brick. My stepmother, Livia, shrieked, a hand fluttering uselessly before covering her own eyes. The aftermath was a blur of hissed arguments and panicked whispers. In his study, my father, his pride in tatters, looked at me with desperate eyes. "Alara," he pleaded, "the car is here. The Thorne family, they insist. You have to wear the veil." Left with no choice, I allowed myself to be shepherded. As I was guided toward the waiting black luxury car, Sarah appeared, now in her bridesmaid dress, her face alight with triumphant malice. This time I'll be the one living in a palace, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You go be that monster's toy. Just bite your lip and endure it. If you survive and escape in 2 years, I might even let Kale come find you. I didn't blame her. I almost pitied her. She had jumped into the pit and then handed me a map of the traps, thinking it was a sentence. She had no idea she'd just given me the keys to my own liberation. The wedding banquet at the Thorne estate was a somber, tense affair. Julian was a specter at the feast, his cold presence silencing any attempt at merriment. After the hollow formalities, he dismissed all the servants from the main villa. The enormous, opulent house fell into a profound silence, holding only the two of us. My heart hammered, but not from fear. Through the delicate lace of my veil I studied him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with features carved from marble and eyes the color of a winter storm. He was every bit as intimidating as Sarah had described. But the disgust in his gaze was a weapon I knew how to parry. Why are you looking at me like that? His voice was low, cutting through the quiet. This is our wedding night, I reminded him, my own voice calm, steady. I don't love you. Nothing is going to happen. Not what you're imagining. You're not me, I replied, the ghost of a smile on my lips. How do you know what I'm imagining? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the lavish suite. Follow me. He led me down a dimly lit hallway lined with dark blood-red wallpaper, the floorboards of rich mahogany groaning under our feet. He was leading me to the basement. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. His basement is full of torture equipment. He walked with a deliberate, steady pace, but soon he began to glance back at me, his expression shifting from cold fury to faint confusion. You're not scared, he stated, a question lurking in the observation. The atmosphere was perfectly curated for terror. It was a stage set for a specific kind of play. And I was no longer an unwilling actress. I'm not afraid, I said. He looked momentarily taken aback, then his features hardened. Then don't cry later. I hate it when women cry. I hate it when men cry, I replied flatly. He pushed open the heavy basement door and flicked on the lights. The room was vast, easily 200 square meters, and it was, as promised, a gallery of exquisite deviance. There were St. Andrew's crosses, a luxurious, padded kennel, racks of tools and shelves of costumes. It was not the dungeon of a brute, but the collection of a connoisseur. Julian took a deep breath, a strange, almost eager light in his eyes as he shrugged off his suit jacket. He selected a length of black, supple leather rope and approached me. His movements were awkward, unpracticed. He grabbed my wrists, his grip firm but his technique clumsy. Something's wrong, he muttered to himself, frustration creasing his brow. This doesn't feel like when I practiced. He fumbled, the rope slipping. He was trying to recreate something he'd only read about, seen in pictures. He was a theoretician, not a practitioner. As he made to try again, a third messy loop that would have chafed horribly, I lost patience. In one smooth, practiced motion I twisted my arms, broke his clumsy hold and seized his wrists. The shock on his face was utterly priceless. You're doing it wrong, I said softly, my voice a low murmur in the quiet room. Here, let me show you. Under his stunned, wide-eyed gaze, I wrapped the rope around his wrists with precise, efficient movements. The knots were firm, secure, but not cruel. I finished with a neat, elegant bow. He stared at his bound hands, then at me. Why do you know how to do this? Who doesn't have a few hobbies when they're young? I smiled. What kind of girl has this as a hobby? He breathed, a mix of outrage and fascination in his voice. Let me go. You don't have the right to treat me like this. I turned to the wall, my eyes scanning the array of tools. I selected a blindfold of black silk. You'll know soon enough whether I have the right. I slipped the sash over his eyes, plunging him into darkness. His breath hitched. With his primary sense taken away, the rest would become heightened, every touch, every sound amplified. He stood rigid for a moment, then began to struggle in earnest, but my knots held fast. I leaned close, my lips brushing the shell of his ear. Stop struggling, I whispered. Just enjoy it. Later he was the one curled in the corner of the plush basement divan, crying. Not tears of pain but of overwhelmed, shattered sensation. The carefully constructed fortress of his control had been breached not by force, but by a superior understanding of the very game he thought he was master of. The next day at the family return banquet, Julian sat stiffly under the blazing sun, a high-necked cashmere sweater doing a poor job of hiding the faint marks on his throat. His face was a thundercloud. My father pulled me aside, his voice low with concern. "He didn't give you a hard time, did he?" I was glowing, radiant with a power I hadn't felt in either of my lives. "Nope. We're great." My stepmother, Livia, glanced from my vibrant face to Julian's stormy one. "You look wonderful, darling, but he doesn't seem quite himself." I looked at Julian and called out, my voice sweet but carrying an undeniable edge of command. "Darling, come sit with me." He let out a derisive snort, but his legs, as if moving of their own accord, carried him to the seat beside me. I patted his thigh. "See? Isn't he behaving well?" His muscle twitched under my hand, but he didn't pull away. He even, subconsciously, leaned into the contact. My father and Livia were dumbfounded. This was not the same man who had looked ready to devour them whole just yesterday. Over lunch I learned that my father, in his fury, had cut off both Kale's funding and Sarah's credit cards. Livia, ever the enabler, whispered to me, "You were always closer to Kale. Can you help me get in touch? I just want to send Sarah a little something." In my first life, my father had been taken in by Kale's act. I had been taken in by his promises. After our rushed, secret marriage, he took me to his remote hometown, confiscated my phone, and revealed his true nature. I was a servant, a prisoner, and a punching bag. It took me 2 months to escape, and the legal system offered little recourse for a legally married woman. He'd only gotten 2 years, and his hatred for me had festered. Sarah, the idiot, had settled his grudge for him when she blew us both up. Now, since she was so determined to tie her fate to his, I would respect her choice. "Sarah is not a child anymore," I told Livia gently. "If she needs money, she'll come home. If you send it to her behind father's back, she'll never learn her lesson." How could father ever forgive her then? Livia nodded, seeing the logic. I then turned my persuasion on my father. I suggested he let me take a more active role in the company. He'd been through enough stress because of Sarah. He deserved a break, perhaps a long trip abroad to clear his head. Seeing that I seemed to have a remarkable handle on Julian Thorne, he agreed. The company would be in good hands, and worst case, Julian would be there to back me up. Reassured, he and Livia began planning an extended overseas trip. Before they left, I made sure to arrange for new private phone numbers for them both. That afternoon, I was summoned to the side villa to see Julian's grandmother, Eleanor. She was his only living family, a frail woman clinging to life. According to Sarah's timeline, she would be rejected by the hospital tonight, and her death would send Julian spiraling into the self-destructive void that would eventually consume him. I couldn't allow that. I had finally found a toy as fascinating as he was, and I wasn't about to let him break. The old woman lay on a state-of-the-art hospital bed, her complexion pale, her energy fading. But her medical report, which I discreetly reviewed, showed no immediately terminal condition. The care was exemplary. So why would she die? She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and pressed a pair of exquisite jade bangles into my palm. "This was my daughter-in-law's," she whispered. Before she passed, she asked me to give it to Julian's wife. I've finally fulfilled that wish. Now that he has you, I can rest easy. And I understood. The cleansing Sarah mentioned wasn't some mystical ritual. It was Julian marrying to fulfill his grandmother's final wish. Once that wish was met, she had lost her will to live. She was ready to die. "Grandmother, don't say that," I said softly. "There are still so many beautiful things in this world to see." She gave a faint, weary smile. "I'm old, child. What haven't I seen?" Seeing her peaceful resignation, I knew I had to be drastic. Later that evening, when Julian returned from work, he was alarmed by the sound of loud, pulsing music coming from the side villa. He rushed over, only to stop dead in the doorway. His grandmother, propped up in her wheelchair, was surrounded by 8 incredibly handsome male dancers of various styles, all moving to the rhythm. The heart monitor beside her was beeping in sync with the bass line. The team of doctors standing by looked utterly scandalized. And Julian's grandmother? She was blushing furiously, but her eyes held a spark I hadn't seen before. Julian turned to me, his face a mask of fury. "Ilara, have you lost your mind?" But before he could erupt, I dragged him out of the room. "I don't care what you do to me," he seethed, "but not to my grandmother. Get those Those performers out of here. The butler and servants stood frozen. I slapped Julian sharp and clean across the face. Calm down and listen to me. You dare hit me, he roared. I dared a lot more last night, I reminded him softly. You seem to appreciate it. His ears turned red. His temper, so vast and intimidating moments before, evaporated into flustered silence. The butler suddenly became fascinated with a tree in the courtyard. My word, is the ironwood blooming? He exclaimed, shepherding the wide-eyed staff away to admire the non-existent flowers. I pulled Julian closer. Your grandmother told me her mission is complete and she doesn't want to live anymore. The panic in his eyes was immediate and raw. What? She thinks no one needs her now that you're married. I talked to her. I think I've given her a new reason to stick around. By hiring a pack of male strippers? He hissed, mortified. The method is irrelevant, I said. The result is what matters. She's your only family. Even if I have to be utterly shameless and take all the blame, I will do whatever it takes to keep her alive. He gave me a long, complicated look, a tumult of emotions warring in his stormy eyes. Touched by your filial piety, he muttered finally, his voice gruff. Then let me express my gratitude properly tonight. His ears flushed an even deeper red, betraying him completely. That night the head doctor called. Mr. Thorne, the madam fell asleep naturally without sedatives. She slept soundly, but he hesitated. When I was taking her blood pressure, she slipped some money into my hand and asked me to press a little harder. I took the phone. Just a minor side effect. Consider it a tip. As I ended the call, I looked at Julian. His hands were bound and suspended above him, his body a beautiful, trembling canvas in the low light of our room. He was kneeling, his eyes glazed with a mixture of resistance and utter rapture. Covering his eyes last time had been a mistake. Those stormy, tear-filled eyes were made for crying. You say this is your first time, I murmured, tracing a line down his chest. So why do you know so much? He blushed deeply. Just like you, he deflected, his voice strained. I read a lot. Never had a chance to try it. I tugged gently on his bonds. This isn't the work of someone who's only read about it. I swear, he insisted, his breath catching. I've never done anything like this, in this life. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded and strange. In this life. He knew. Or he suspected. It didn't matter. The game was afoot and the rules had been irrevocably changed. I smiled down at him. Well then, Julian. Let's begin your education. The next 6 months unfolded not as a sentence, but as a complex and exhilarating game of strategy and sensation. Julian Thorne, the man feared in boardrooms across the continent, became my most dedicated student and, to my immense satisfaction, my most responsive canvas. The coldness in his eyes had thawed, replaced by a burning, focused intensity that was reserved solely for the world we built behind closed doors. My father and Livia departed for their extended trip, blissfully unaware of the true power dynamics in the Thorne mansion. With them gone, I turned my attention to the family company Vance Innovations. It was a solid, respectable firm, but in my previous life, I had seen it stagnate and be slowly eroded by poor investments. Now, with the clarity of hindsight and a ruthlessness born of 2 lifetimes, I began to make changes. I streamlined departments, divested from sentimental but failing projects, and invested heavily in emerging technologies I knew were poised for explosive growth. The board, initially skeptical of the boss's daughter, was swiftly silenced by a series of staggering quarterly profits. Julian watched my corporate takeover with a sort of bewildered admiration. He'd expected a victim, a pawn. He'd found a queen. One afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding, I was lounging by the estate's shimmering artificial lake, a butler grilling seafood for my lunch and a maid pouring chilled white wine. The winter sun was weak but welcome. It was then my phone buzzed with a video call. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, a number I'd long since deleted but whose digits were etched into my memory from a lifetime of desperation. Saraphina. I answered. Her face, pixelated and strained, filled the screen. She was clearly testing the waters, having been blocked by our parents. She didn't expect me to pick up. Her jaw went slack as she took in my surroundings. The luxurious lakeside setting, my designer leisure wear, the unobtrusive service. Alara, she stammered. Why aren't you locked in Julian's basement? I gave her a sweet, condescending smile. Why would my husband lock me up when he adores me? Adores you? Impossible. Her voice sharpened, verging on the hysterical edge I remembered so well. He doesn't have a heart. I begged him in our last life and he still chained me up like a dog. He can't love you. He won't. Even if he didn't blame you for the wedding fiasco, he'd blame you for that old hag's death. You should be eating from a bowl on the floor. Just then Julian's grandmother, Eleanor, leaned into the frame, her complexion rosy and her eyes bright. What's this? Which old hag died? Since the night of the dancers, Grandma Eleanor had embraced life with a vengeance. Her health had improved dramatically. She'd taken up yoga, her posture was now more elegant than mine, and she had two remarkably handsome personal trainers, both over 6 feet tall, who seemed to motivate her in ways medicine never could. Julian, seeing the life return to her eyes, had grudgingly accepted their presence. When Sarah saw Grandma Eleanor alive and glowing, her face contorted in disbelief. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's supposed to be dead. She must be a ghost." Grandma raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "How rude. You're the one who looks half dead." He turned to me. "I'm sorry, dear. I thought she was your aunt." I suppressed a laugh. "That's my little sister, Grandma. She married, far away. Things haven't been easy. Her mind isn't what it used to be." Grandma looked at Sarah with pity. "Oh, you poor thing." She then waved a dismissive hand. "Well, I'll leave you to it. My assistants are waiting to take me for a spin in the new convertible." She wheeled herself away with a surprising burst of speed. I turned back to Sarah, whose face was a thundercloud of confusion and rage. "She's not dead." Then Julian, he didn't fall apart. He didn't gamble everything away. "Not only is he intact," I said smoothly, "he's recently become the public face of a national anti-gambling campaign." Sarah's face crumpled. "But that's not how it went for me at all. None of this happened in my version. Elara, weren't you the one who became the billionaire's wife last time? Weren't you living like this? Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was a whine, the sound of a spoiled child whose script had been torn up. I looked her up and down through the screen. She was filthy. Her hair was lank and greasy, her skin was sallow and dotted with bruises, and she wore a faded, shapeless dress. Her eyes darted around nervously. 6 months and she was still trapped in that village. The realization dawned on me, she wasn't a prisoner. She was a willing participant in her own delusion, still clinging to the fantasy that Kale was her ticket to wealth. So I fed the delusion. "Oh, Kale treated me like a queen in the last life," I said, my voice dripping with false nostalgia. "His mother too. They never made me lift a finger. And Kale didn't use my father's money. We built his empire together from the ground up. That's why when he became successful he cherished me. He was so afraid of losing me." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Sarah looked completely shattered. "Why?" she wailed. "Why are they so different with me? I've been good to them. I'm exhausted, Elara. I can't do this anymore. Please just help me get in touch with Dad. Tell him to send money." "Dad and Livia are traveling abroad," I said with a sympathetic sigh. "They changed their numbers. I can't reach them either." "They went abroad? Without me?" The injustice of it all ignited her fury. "I'm suffering here and they're off vacationing? Well, what did you expect?" I chided gently. "The stress you caused Father. He needed to get away before you gave him a heart attack. Honestly, even I have to keep my distance from you for my own peace of mind." This was a lie, of course. I was the one funding their endless, luxurious cruise, ensuring they stayed happily out of the way. The truth was, under my management, Vance Innovations had increased its valuation tenfold. A few $100,000 for my parents' trip was a rounding error. Livia, initially worried about Sarah, had been so thoroughly seduced by the life of leisure that she'd all but forgotten her daughter. Now, with all other avenues closed, Sarah pinned her hopes on me. "Then you send me money," she demanded, the old entitlement surging back. "Start with $5 million. I let out a light, tinkling laugh. "Sis, don't be absurd. You know what Julian is like. I may live like a billionaire's wife, but I don't actually control any money. The company and the assets are managed by his people. My personal accounts have been frozen for ages." I glanced over at Julian, who was reading reports by the fireplace. He looked up and shot me a glare of pure indignation. His cards were the ones gathering dust. Sarah clearly didn't believe me, but she wasn't leaving empty-handed. The jewelry you're wearing looks expensive. Mail it to me. I'll pawn it myself. When I didn't immediately agree, her tone turned wheedling. Don't be stingy. Just because Julian is playing nice now doesn't mean it will last. Once he gets bored and shows his true colors, you'll be trapped. When Kale becomes the richest man, it will be because of me, and I'll make sure he comes to save you. She was still painting her pretty little picture. It was almost sad. Just then I saw Julian wave a hand off camera, a silent cue. I played along. Darling. I called out sweetly. He walked into the frame, his presence instantly commanding even through a tiny screen. The moment Sarah saw him, she let out a terrified shriek and fumbled the phone. The screen went black, but the audio stayed on. I'm sorry, she babbled, her voice trembling with primal fear. I didn't mean to contact anyone. Please don't lock me up again. Julian, a masterful actor when motivated, delivered his line with chilling perfection. If I ever catch you making outside calls again, he said, his voice a low, menacing rumble, you will never see the light of day. Once the call was over, he pulled me into his arms, his earlier indignation gone, replaced by a warm possessiveness. Troublesome relatives? He murmured into my hair. Just a minor nuisance, I replied, leaning into his embrace. His lips brushed my ear. Let me help you unwind tonight. His voice was a husky promise. I pretended to consider it. I suppose. But don't get used to it. He beamed, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face, and immediately went off to, I presumed, plan the evening's activities. As I bent to retrieve my phone, I heard Sarah's voice, a bitter snarl from the speaker she hadn't disconnected. So much for the high life. It's all a sham. I ended the call and blocked the number. One thing was certain, she wouldn't be coming to me for help again. I made a mental note to instruct all household and company staff that if a woman matching Sarah's description, disheveled and desperate, ever appeared, she was to be escorted from the premises immediately. A few moments later, my phone buzzed again with a news alert. The financial section reported that a small, promising tech startup I had heavily invested in had just been acquired for a sum that tripled my initial stake. I smiled. Sarah was chasing a phantom billionaire in a dirty village, while I was quietly building a real empire of my own. The irony was richer than any fortune Kale could ever have dreamed of. The seasons turned, and with them, the dynamics within the Thorne estate solidified into a new, unshakable normal. Julian, the feared titan of industry, had become a man quietly, fervently devoted to a single private obsession: me. The vast, cold house now felt like a sanctuary, its halls echoing not with silence, but with the subtle, charged energy of our shared secret life. He was a brilliant, eager student, and I, his exacting tutor. One evening, as a fire crackled in the library hearth, I found myself watching him. He was engrossed in a report, his brow furrowed in concentration. The image was so serene, so domesticated, that a strange, unfamiliar thought wriggled into my mind. It had been over half a year. We had been intimate with a frequency and intensity that left us both breathless. And I had never once taken precautions. The thought had simply not occurred to me, lost in the whirlwind of reclaiming my power and reshaping my destiny. Julian, I began, my voice cutting through the comfortable silence. He looked up, his stormy eyes instantly soft and focused on me. It's been months. I haven't been careful. Maybe we should get checked. To be sure everything is in order. The change in him was instantaneous and profound. The softness vanished, replaced by a shuttered, guarded look. His jaw tightened. No, he said, the word final and sharp as a sliver of ice. There's no need for that. I studied him, my head tilted. His reaction was too swift, too absolute. No need. Aren't you the least bit curious? He narrowed his eyes, a flicker of something dark, fear perhaps, in their depths. I said no. Before I could press further, he stood, abruptly ending the conversation. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. He left the room, his posture rigid. So confident, so evasive. He was hiding something. The certainty of it settled in my gut. The next day I went to see Grandma Eleanor. She was in the sunroom, being gently guided through a yoga pose by one of her handsome assistants. I waited until she was finished and sipping her green tea. Grandma, I started, choosing my words carefully. I had a strange conversation with Julian last night. About children. She set her cup down with a delicate clink, her expression turning serious. Oh. I just wondered about the Thorne family line. It's just him, isn't it? Her face softened with a profound sadness. Yes, dear. Only one son per generation for as long as anyone can remember. It's a heavy burden. She reached out and patted my hand. If it ends with him, I don't know how I'll face his grandfather, his parents. A determined light came into her eyes. Within hours she had mobilized her considerable influence. By that afternoon, over a dozen of the country's top male fertility specialists were assembled in the main drawing room for what had been billed as a general wellness consultation for Julian. When he arrived home and was ushered into the room, his face darkened into a thundercloud of pure, unadulterated fury. I watched from the doorway as he took in the scene. The doctors, their equipment, his grandmother's hopeful, anxious face. "What is the meaning of this?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "It's just a checkup, dear," Eleanor said, her voice wavering slightly. "Get out," he said to the doctors, his tone leaving no room for argument. "All of you, get out of my house." The specialists, sensing the volcanic eruption brewing, scrambled to pack their things and fled. Julian stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He finally turned his furious gaze on me. "This was your doing," he accused. "I didn't deny it. I just want to understand, Julian. Why the absolute refusal?" Cornered, with no escape, the truth finally tore out of him. "Because I already did it," he shouted, the words raw and painful. "Right after the wedding on that business trip to Zurich. I had a vasectomy." The air left the room. Grandma Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I just stared at him, stunned. "My mother died bringing me into this world," he said, his voice dropping to a tortured whisper. "She bled out on the delivery table. I watched the light leave my father's eyes that day and it never returned. I will not risk that with you." He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, fierce love that stole my breath. "I won't be the reason you leave me." My heart, that cold, calculated organ I had so carefully armored, softened. "Just a little. What if I told you I'm willing to take that risk?" I asked, my voice gentle. He shook his head, his expression grim. "Well, I'm not." This idiot was so terrified of loss he was willing to let his bloodline die with him. "I'm ordering you to have it reversed," I said, the command clear in my tone. "I like children. A child with our genes would be extraordinary. I want to see it." "You could suffer," he whispered, his voice cracking as he reached for my hand, clutching it like a lifeline. He looked as if I were already on the precipice of death. "But you'll be with me," I said, turning my hand to lace my fingers with his. "You won't let me suffer, will you, Julian?" He hesitated, a war raging behind his eyes. Finally he mumbled, "Let's wait 2 more years." I raised an eyebrow. "Wait for what?" "I'll establish a research institute," he said, completely serious. "We'll fund the top minds in reproductive science. We'll pioneer male pregnancy. Once the technology is mature and safe, I'll carry the child." I was speechless. I stared at him, this formidable, powerful man willing to undergo a medical miracle, or a nightmare, just to keep me safe from a hypothetical danger. "Aren't you afraid something would happen to you?" Finally managed. He shrugged, a gesture of utter, reckless self-sacrifice. "If it does, it's fine. I'll make a will. I'll leave all my shares, the entire empire, to you. You've done a brilliant job with your father's company. I know you can handle mine. Just, please take care of Grandma." I couldn't take it anymore. All I had asked for was 1 single sperm cell, and he was drafting his last will and testament. It was the most dramatic, over-the-top, and utterly sincere declaration I had ever witnessed. "Fine," I sighed, a wave of exasperated affection washing over me. "I'll just find someone else to father my baby then. I'm sure there are plenty of willing candidates." His eyes instantly flashed from despair to a possessive, crimson rage. "How dare you?" he snarled, pulling me tightly against him. "I've given you my heart, my soul, my entire being. And now you speak of finding another." The subject was closed, but the battle lines had been drawn. And I had no intention of losing. Another 6 months slipped by. My corporate conquests continued. the Vance and Thorn empires slowly, inexorably intertwining under my guidance. The news of our success was a constant, low hum in the background of our lives. It was this hum, I was sure, that finally drove Saraphina to her most desperate act yet. I was being chauffeured home from a late meeting when a ragged figure hurled itself in front of the car. My driver slammed on the brakes. Instinct, a primal fear left over from my first death, seized me. I recoiled, my hand flying to the door handle, ready to flee, terrified she had a canister of gas hidden in her tattered clothes. But it wasn't Sarah who opened my door. It was Kale. He looked older, harder. The scholarly charm had been sandblasted away by a year of manual labor and bitterness. But his eyes held the same manipulative gleam as he reached in, took my hand, and pulled me from the car with a show of gentleness that made my skin crawl. "Elara," he said, his voice dripping with a feigned, deep emotion. "I know everything now. I understand. I won't make the same mistakes again." My instincts screamed. I instinctively wrapped my arms around my stomach. A protective gesture I didn't even realize I was making until I saw his eyes drop to the slight, firm curve there. His expression transformed from false tenderness to ugly shock. He turned and slapped Sarah so hard she stumbled back against the car. "You said he was impotent," he roared. "Then whose child is she carrying?" Sarah stammered, clutching her cheek. "That's not possible. In the last life he never touched me. He had no interest. Wasn't it because he couldn't?" Kale's rage was a physical force. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "So you cheated? You whore." These two idiots, I thought, almost amused by their chaotic, predictable drama. "I didn't cheat," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through their hysteria. "This baby is Julian's. I don't know why he never touched you, but our relationship is very healthy." I decided to switch tactics to play on their greed and their fear. The Thorn family has only one heir per generation. Julian values this child more than anything in the world. If you two want money, fine. Use this situation. But if anything happens to me or this baby and Julian is provoked, you will be less than dust. Sarah froze, her hand dropping. But Kale slapped her again. "Don't you dare lay a finger on her," he barked. He turned back to me, his face a mask of syrupy concern. "Don't worry, Elara. No matter whose child you're carrying, I'll protect you." Sarah let out a bitter, disgusted laugh. "Cut the act. You think he'll choose you over her? Tie her up. We'll bring her back and ransom her." I looked at Kale, letting a flicker of feigned vulnerability show in my eyes. You still care about me?" "Of course," he said without a moment's hesitation. "The one I love has always been you." Sarah's jaw dropped. "What am I?" she shrieked. "You said you loved me." Kale raised his hand again and Sarah flinched, ducking her head and covering it in a conditioned response of pure terror. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Lisa, I'm taking you home." As he spoke, he deftly plucked both my phone and my purse from my grasp and tossed them into the gutter. Then he leaned into the car and disabled the GPS. He gently but firmly guided me into the passenger seat of his own beat-up sedan. I didn't resist. I let him. As he drove us away from the city lights back toward the rural prison he called home, I felt a strange sense of calm. What they didn't know was that the simple pearl stud in my ear was a panic button and a tracking beacon. A single press would bring Julian down upon them like the wrath of God. But I didn't press it. Not yet. Since these two relics of my past were so determined to drag me back into it, I would go willingly. It was time once and for all to settle our accounts. The drive to Kale's village was a journey back in time, a descent into a world of grime and grim futility. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and manure, a stark contrast to the citrus and sandalwood scent of the Thorn estate. Kale tried to maintain his charade of concerned protector, his hand occasionally patting my knee in a gesture that made my skin crawl. "We'll get through this, Elara," he murmured. "Once we have the money from Thorn, we can start over. Just you and me." I said nothing, just watched the bleak landscape roll by. He truly believed his own delusion, that he was the hero of this story, rescuing me from a monster only to claim his rightful prize. When we arrived, the shack was exactly as I remembered from my first life. Cramped, dark, and reeking of hopelessness. Kale's mother, Martha, was waiting on the rickety porch, her face a permanent scowl of discontent. When her eyes landed on my pronounced baby bump, they widened in shock, then narrowed into slits of pure venom. She didn't say a word to me. Instead, she rounded on Sarah and smacked her hard across the face. "You useless girl. You said my son was lacking. But she's pregnant with Thorne's brat. That means you're the broken one. If I'd known, I never would have let him dirty himself with you." So Martha knew about the reincarnation too. The entire sordid plot was out in the open in this filthy little hovel. Sarah, with a shred of her old fire, snapped back, "You old hag. Why are you hitting me? I helped your son kidnap her. Once we get the money, I'll be the billionaire's wife." Martha actually cackled. "Then I'll be the billionaire's mother." But Kale wasn't joining in their shared fantasy. He led me past them back to the same tiny airless room I had been imprisoned in before. The memories assaulted me, the fear, the hunger, the despair. A wave of nausea, both physical and emotional, hit me hard. I doubled over, retching. Without a word, Kale handed me a chipped bucket. He even patted my back with a disturbing mimicry of gentleness. "Elara," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I regret everything. If Sarah hadn't thrown herself at me that day, we would never have been separated." I held back the bile and the contempt. "It's too late for regrets." "No, it's not," he insisted, his grip tightening on my shoulder. "Just tell me, how did I become a billionaire? What was the key?" The question was so pathetic it was almost laughable. Emily had truly filled his head with nonsense. I decided to give him a version of the truth, tailored to feed his ego. "You're capable, Kale. Otherwise, my father never would have sponsored you. You only succeeded because you inherited my father's company, with my help." I let the implication hang in the air. I was the key. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "So, it really was because of you." I played my part, letting my voice tremble slightly. "Sarah ruined everything for us. She stole our future. I can't be with you anymore. Not now. And Julian, he's taken over everything." Kale's gaze turned cold and calculating as he glanced out the grimy window. Sarah was standing there, trying to eavesdrop, unaware her reflection was perfectly visible in the glass. I was fanning the flames and he was all too ready to burn. "It's not too late," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That night I was shaken awake. It was Sarah, her face pale and frantic in the moonlight filtering through the single dirty pane. "We have to leave. Now," she hissed, her breath coming in quick, panicked puffs. "Leave? Where to?" I asked, feigning drowsiness. "Kale and his mother. They're not going to wait for a ransom." Her eyes were wide with genuine terror. "They're planning to cut the baby out of you. We have to run." She had already stolen the keys to the beat-up sedan. As she frantically turned the ignition, the engine sputtering to life, the front door of the shack flew open. Kale and Martha stormed out into the yard. "You little traitor. Trying to run." Martha shrieked. Kale marched straight to the driver's side, yanked the door open and dragged Sarah out by her hair. Then he rushed to my side of the car, his expression shifting to one of contrived concern. "Eleanor, don't go anywhere. Stay with me." "I wasn't trying to run," I said, my voice calm and clear in the tense night air. "Sarah told me you wanted to cut my baby out. You wouldn't hurt me, would you, Kale?" "Of course not," he said, his voice firm. "You're my lucky star." Then he turned and the mask of the protector vanished, replaced by the face of the abuser. He began beating Sarah with a methodical, sickening cruelty. "You tried to run? Fine. But how dare you try to take her from me? You're pure evil." Sarah screamed, curling into a ball on the ground. "And what about you?" she cried, her voice breaking. "I stayed by your side for a year. I worked until my hands bled, earned money for you to waste. I kidnapped my own sister for you. And now you want to sell me off to your crippled uncle in the mountains? To be his billionaire's wife? Keep dreaming. I killed him once, I can kill him again." Martha screamed, "You dare blame my son? He could have been a king if not for you, you jinx. Ever since he married you, he's accomplished nothing. But once he marries Elara, he'll finally reach the top." Kale stood over Sarah, his chest heaving. "As long as I'm here, no one is going to touch a single hair on Elara's head. If you try to kill her, I'll kill you first." The three of them erupted into a chaotic, vicious brawl. After a year of hard labor, Sarah had a feral strength. She slapped Martha so hard 2 of the old woman's teeth flew out, but she was still no physical match for Kale. He grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the side of the car. "Alara, help me!" Sarah gasped, her eyes bulging. But I had heard enough. I'd heard their plans, their betrayals, the sheer pathetic ugliness of it all. "He never loved you," Sarah choked out, her gaze fixed on me. "He just wanted to use you to get your family's company. Once he had it, he was going to get rid of the baby. If you survived, maybe you were his lucky charm. If not, tough luck." "Don't listen to her, Alara," Kale pleaded, his grip tightening. "She's just trying to turn you against me. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't want the baby. I thought we could trade it to Thorn for your family's company. Then we could have our own children later." "Oh," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Then you'll need to divorce Sarah first." Sarah laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Keep dreaming. Then die," Kale growled. He began to choke her in earnest. Her face turned purple, her struggles growing weaker. It was time. As Sarah faced true death, her survival instincts kicked in. She went wild, her fingers clawing at his face, her nails digging deep. With a shriek of agony, Kale stumbled back, clutching his face. Blood streamed from between his fingers. "I can't see, Mom. I'm blind," he screamed. Martha panicked. She ran into the house and came back out wielding a heavy rusted kitchen knife. "You dare hurt my son. I'll kill you, you filth." Sarah, thinking quickly for the first time in either of her lives, scrambled into the car. As Martha lunged in after her, Sarah slipped out the other side and slammed the door shut, locking it. Martha, who had never been in a car, had no idea how to work the manual locks. She began pounding on the window, her curses muffled by the glass. Sarah didn't flinch. She walked calmly to the other side, shoved the blinded, wailing Kale into the back seat, and then produced the car's cigarette lighter. She flicked it, the coil glowing orange in the darkness. She looked at me, and for a split second our eyes met. There was no sisterhood there, only a shared, terrible history. Then she tossed the glowing lighter straight into the fuel tank. Boom. The explosion was deafening, a fireball of orange and yellow that lit up the night sky, consuming the car and the two people trapped inside. The heat washed over my face, a grotesque echo of my first death. Sarah stood watching, her body silhouetted against the inferno. She burst into hysterical, unhinged laughter. "Dead. They're dead. Finally, let's see who dares lay a finger on me now." She turned to me, her smile twisted and triumphant. "Now it's your turn. Once you help me get 100 million out of Julian, I'll send you off to be with your beloved Kale. Then I'll flee abroad and live the good life. Men are useless. In the end, you can only rely on yourself. You're realizing that now?" I asked, my voice flat. "A bit late, don't you think?" The distant wail of a police siren cut through the night. Sarah's expression morphed from triumph to panic. "When did you call the cops?" she snarled. "While you three were brawling," I said calmly. "Oh, and one more thing. Kale never had what it takes to become rich. I was the one who became the billionaire. He only got 2 years in prison because I turned him in for what he did to me. So, thank you, little sister, for helping me take care of my unfinished business this time around." The revelation was the final, unbearable straw. Rage, disbelief, and the shattering of her last delusion contorted her features. With a primal scream, she lunged at me, her hands outstretched like claws. "I'm going to kill you." Bang. The sound was sharp, precise. A sniper's round. Sarah crumpled to the ground just feet from me, a dark bloom spreading across her chest. Before I could even process it, the thunderous beat of helicopter rotors filled the air, whipping the dust and smoke into a frenzy. The side door slid open and there was Julian. He didn't wait for the craft to land. He rappelled down, hitting the ground and rushing toward me, his face a mask of frantic fear. He pulled me into a crushing embrace, his body trembling. "Are you okay?" he demanded, his voice raw. I smiled against his chest, the chaos and the sirens fading into a distant hum. "Your son is fine." He pulled back, his hands cradling my face, his stormy eyes blazing with a terrifying, beautiful intensity. "I was asking about you, you heartless woman." I stood on my toes and kissed the corner of his mouth, a promise and a reassurance. "Don't worry. No one will ever hurt me again." The aftermath of the fire and the shooting was a controlled, clinical operation. Julian's security team materialized from the shadows, coordinating seamlessly with the arriving police. I gave a brief, clear statement. I had been kidnapped by my unstable sister and her abusive husband. A struggle had ensued, leading to the tragic accident and my sister's mental break, which ended when security intervened to protect me. My status, Julian's influence, and the obvious truth of my pregnancy made the story unquestionable. We were whisked away in the helicopter before the local news crews could even set up their cameras. Back at the Thorne estate, a different kind of storm awaited. Grandma Eleanor took one look at my disheveled state and my pronounced bump and descended into a flurry of maternal fury and concern, ordering a full medical evaluation and berating Julian for not having a larger security detail. Julian endured it silently, his hand never leaving the small of my back, his presence a solid, unyielding wall between me and the world. But in the quiet of our bedroom the wall crumbled. The fear he had held at bay crashed down on him. He was frantic, his hands trembling as he helped me out of my soiled clothes, his eyes scanning every inch of my skin for injuries. "I felt the tracker go offline," he said, his voice husky. "For 12 minutes, Alara. 12 minutes I had no signal." I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence, just buried his face in my neck, his arms wrapping around me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm here," I whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm perfectly fine. And I handled it." "You shouldn't have had to," he growled against my skin, the words laced with a self-loathing that surprised me. "I should have obliterated that pathetic worm the moment I learned of his existence in this life. I was too lenient, thinking him beneath my notice." This was a new side of Julian, not the controlled dominant or the eager submissive, but a raw, vulnerable man shaken by the near loss of something he cherished. It was more intoxicating than any power play. The next 5 months were a study in surreal domesticity. Julian became my shadow. He worked from home, his office relocated to the suite adjacent to mine. He attended every doctor's appointment, his large frame looking comically out of place in the pastel-colored waiting rooms, his expression one of intense, grave concentration as the obstetrician discussed fetal development. He read every parenting book he could find, his brow furrowed as if studying a complex corporate merger. The day I went into labor he was a model of terrifying efficiency, getting me to the private hospital wing with a speed that defied physics. But once the medical team took over, his composure shattered. He paced the corridor outside the operating room. I had opted for a scheduled C-section, a decision he had supported with palpable relief, a storm cloud of anxiety. The nurses later told me with barely suppressed giggles that he fainted. Not once but 3 times. The sound of my first groan of discomfort through the door was enough to send the great Julian Thorne to his knees. When it was over and our son, a robust, loud baby with a shock of dark hair and Julian's stormy eyes, was placed in my arms, I felt a profound, weary triumph. I was up and walking a few hours later, feeling sore but fiercely alive. Julian, however, had to be half-carried into the room by a stoic-faced butler and a snickering security guard. His face was ashen, his hands shaking as he reached for our son. He looked from the baby's face to mine, his own a canvas of overwhelming emotion. He leaned down, his forehead touching mine. "This," he whispered, his voice cracking, "is the only child my wife will ever have. It is the final heir of the Thorne line. Anyone who dares suggest she go through this again will answer to me personally." Grandma Eleanor, cradling her great-grandson with tears of joy streaming down her face, sighed with a mixture of exasperation and affection. "They're all like this. No wonder we only have one son per generation." We named him Alexander. With the chaos of the past finally silenced and the promise of the future sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside our bed, a deep, settled peace took root within me. I had rewritten my fate, reclaimed my power, and built a life on my own terms. The ghosts of Saraphina and Kale were nothing more than ashes on the wind. One afternoon, as I was nursing Alexander in the sunroom, Julian entered. He'd been quieter than usual for days, thoughtful. He sat beside me, watching us with that unervingly focused gaze. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice tentative, "about what you said. About a sibling for Alexander." I looked at him, surprised. "I thought you declared my childbearing years officially over." "They are," he said firmly. Then he took a deep breath. "But you were right. A child with our genes. The potential is extraordinary. And I've had the procedure reversed." I stared at him, utterly speechless. The man who had undergone secret surgery to avoid this very risk, who had fainted at the mere idea of my discomfort, had willingly walked back into that vulnerability. For me. When? Finally managed. A few weeks ago. While you were preoccupied. He gestured to the baby. The recovery was insignificant. I knew that was a lie. I could see the lingering discomfort in the careful way he still sat. This was his sacrifice, his way of meeting me in the middle, of conquering his own deepest fear for a future we would build together. I reached out and took his hand, lacing our fingers together. I didn't thank him. Gratitude would have diminished the magnitude of his act. Instead, I brought his knuckles to my lips and kissed them, a silent promise. Good, I said softly. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man who had faced his abyss and stepped back from the edge, not alone but hand in hand. Later, as we stood together looking down at our sleeping son, the setting sun painting the room in hues of gold and orange, I knew this was not an ending, nor was it a simple happy beginning. It was an equilibrium. The scales of our strange, powerful love were balanced. The ruthless billionaire and the reborn avenger had forged a partnership that was unbreakable. The world outside still saw Julian Thorne, the cold, formidable titan. They saw Elara Vance Thorne, the elegant, shrewd wife. They would see Alexander, the sole heir to a vast empire. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the man who would rewrite the laws of nature to please his wife, or the woman who had torn apart the fabric of her own destiny to claim this life. They didn't see the beautiful, terrifying, and perfectly balanced power we wielded behind closed doors. I had wanted safety, then revenge, then power. I had gained all three. And in the quiet, sun-drenched stillness, with my son in his crib and my husband's hand in mine, I understood that the greatest victory was not in the domination, but in the surrender. The mutual, chosen, and absolute surrender to a love that was as fierce and unyielding as we were. No more second chances. This life was enough. It was everything. Peace, I discovered, was not a passive state but an active creation. It was a structure we built together, Julian and I, with the same meticulous care we applied to our business empires. The first year of Alexander's life was a study in this new, deliberate tranquility. The shrill cries of the past were replaced by the demanding yet pure cries of our son. The scent of smoke was forever banished by the soft, powdery smell of his skin. Julian was a revelation as a father. The man who commanded boardrooms with a glacial stare would spend hours on the floor of the nursery, patiently building block towers for Alexander to gleefully demolish. The obsession he had once directed solely at me was now lovingly split, his devotion to our son a fierce, protective flame. He still managed my security with paranoid intensity, but the threat now felt distant, theoretical. The world, it seemed, had finally left us to our happiness. It was during this period of calm that I turned my attention to a project of my own, separate from the corporate machinations of Vance Thorne. I established the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at providing resources and safe houses for victims of domestic abuse and coercive control. I poured a significant portion of my personal wealth into it, drawing on the knowledge of my first life with Kale to shape its programs. I didn't put my name on it publicly. The work was its own reward, a quiet atonement and a weapon against the kind of darkness that had once consumed me. Julian, of course, knew. He found the initial proposal on my desk one evening. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes held a deep, unsettling understanding. This is because of him. The scholarship student, he stated, not asked. Yes, I admitted, bracing for some sign of jealousy or disapproval. He simply nodded, a grim finality in the gesture. Good. Let his memory be useful for something then. He transferred a staggering sum to the foundation's account the next day without another word. It was his way of saying he understood that the scars of my past were part of the landscape of my soul, and he would not ask me to hide them. Our physical life together evolved. The frantic, exploratory energy of our first year matured into a deeper, more intuitive connection. The ropes and tools in the basement were still used, but now it was a language we were both fluent in, a dance of push and pull that always ended in a profound and mutual surrender. He was no longer just my student, he was my equal, my counterpart. He could anticipate my desires and I his limits. It was a harmony more satisfying than any victory. The storm, when it came, was not from the past, but from the future we had so carefully built. It began with a cough. A small rattling sound from Alexander's nursery that had the night nurse calling us at 3 a.m. It was just a cold, the pediatrician assured us. But it didn't go away. It deepened, turning into a worrying rattle in his tiny chest. Within days, our serene home was once again a hub of medical activity. Alexander was listless, his fever spiking despite the strongest medications his small body could tolerate. Julian transformed. The doting father vanished, replaced by the corporate titan facing a hostile takeover. He assembled a team of the world's leading pediatric specialists in our home, his voice a low, relentless drumbeat of demand for answers for action. But medicine, unlike business, does not always bow to willpower. The diagnosis, when it came, was a sucker punch to our perfect world. A rare, aggressive form of childhood leukemia. The oncologist used words like protocols and survival rates, but all I heard was a roaring in my ears. I looked at Julian and saw the same abject terror I felt reflected in his eyes, magnified 1,000 times. This was the loss he had spent his entire life trying to prevent. He became a ghost. He spent days and nights at the hospital where Alexander was admitted, his face a haggard mask. He dismissed the teams of doctors, accusing them of incompetence. He poured billions into experimental research, trying to buy a cure that didn't exist. The dynamic between us shifted. My strength, which had always been the anchor in our relationship, seemed to falter in the face of this biological betrayal. Julian's, conversely, hardened into a desperate, brittle shell. One night, in the sterile quiet of Alexander's hospital room, the beeping of the monitors a morbid soundtrack, he broke. Our son was sleeping fitfully, pale and fragile amid the tubes and wires. "I told you," Julian whispered, his voice ragged. He wasn't looking at me but at Alexander. "I told you this would happen. This is the price. This is the universe collecting its debt for my happiness." I moved to him, placing a hand on his arm. "Juliano, this is not your fault. It's an illness. We will fight it." He shook my hand off, a gesture so uncharacteristically violent it stunned me. "Fight it? What? Money? It's not working. Don't you see? The thorn line is cursed. It ends with suffering. My mother, and now, my son." His breath hitched. "I should never have reversed the procedure. I should never have given you false hope." The words were a lash. "False hope? He is our son, Julian. He is not a mistake. He is a target," he roared, then immediately lowered his voice, glancing at the sleeping child. "He is a vulnerability I created. The one thing that could truly destroy me." He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "And you." It was the grief talking, the terror. I knew that. But it carved a fresh wound nonetheless. In his darkest moment, he was retreating to the fortress of his isolation, seeing the love we had created as a strategic weakness. The following weeks were a hellish blur. Alexander underwent his first round of chemotherapy. It was brutal, savaging his tiny body. I spent my days by his side, reading him stories, singing softly, my heart breaking with every whimper. Julian was there, but he was a statue, his face a rigid mask, his interactions with the medical staff growing colder and more demanding. The breaking point came during a meeting with the lead oncologist. Julian was systematically dismantling the man's treatment plan, his questions sharp and accusatory. "The success rate is unacceptable," Julian stated, his tone leaving frost on the glass walls of the consultation room. "You are treating my son with a blunt instrument. I want alternatives. I want the next generation therapies, the ones still in trials." "Mr. Thorne," the doctor said, his patience wearing thin, "we are following the best established protocol for this specific mutation. Alexander is stable. We must be patient." "Stable is not cured," Julian bit out. "Stable is waiting to die. I will not have my son be a statistic in your mediocre study." I'd had enough. "Julian," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "That's enough." He turned his furious gaze on me. "Enough? You would settle for stable? You would let them do this to him? They are saving him." I stood, my own composure fraying. "This is not a boardroom you can intimidate. This is science and it takes time. Your rage is not helping him. It's only frightening everyone, including me." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw him flinch. I had never admitted to being frightened of him before. Not in this life. The fight went out of him. The corporate titan deflated, leaving behind a terrified, exhausted man. He looked from my anguished face to the doctor's resigned one, and then back at the chart outlining his son's painful treatment. Without another word he turned and walked out of the room. I didn't see him for the rest of the day. The hospital staff tiptoed around me. That night as I sat alone by Alexander's bed holding his small, feverish hand, I felt a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache. I had faced down a vengeful sister, a manipulative husband and a monster. But I didn't know how to fight this enemy, and for the first time it felt like I was fighting it alone. The peace we had built had been an illusion. The storm was here and it was threatening to shatter the very foundation of our world, not with violence from without, but with a slow, creeping despair from within. Julian's absence stretched through the night. The silence in the hospital room was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and Alexander's labored breathing. The loneliness was a cold weight in my chest. I had miscalculated. I had believed our bond, forged in fire and dominance, was unbreakable. But I had not accounted for this particular enemy, a foe that could not be intimidated, outmaneuvered, or bound. Just before dawn the door whispered open. He stood there, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. He looked ravaged, his clothes rumpled, his eyes shadowed with a despair so deep it seemed to swallow the light. He didn't speak. He just walked to the other side of Alexander's bed and stood staring down at our son. His hands, usually so sure and commanding, hung limply at his sides. "I went to the research institute," he said, his voice a hollow echo. "The one I started for male pregnancy." A bitter, self-mocking smile touched his lips. "I thought if I could throw enough money at them they could magic up a cure. They showed me their work. It's brilliant, years ahead of its time. And utterly useless to us right now." I remained silent, letting him talk, letting the poison drain. "I have spent my entire life building walls," he continued, his gaze fixed on Alexander. "Fortresses of money, of power, of control. To keep the world out. To keep loss out. I thought I had succeeded. And then you," he finally looked at me, his eyes gleaming with unshed tears. "You scaled every wall without even trying. You didn't conquer the fortress. You made it a home. And I let you. I welcomed you in." He took a shaky breath. "And then we built this perfect tiny person. And he became the heart of the fortress, the one thing I could not protect with money or threats. He is the vulnerability I willingly, joyfully created. And now that he is under siege, my first instinct is to rage at the walls that failed. To rage at you for making me care this much." His confession hung in the sterile air. It was the raw, unvarnished truth. He wasn't angry at the doctors, not really. He was terrified of the love that made him so exquisitely vulnerable. "You think I'm not scared?" I asked, my own voice thick. "You think I don't lie awake at night, terrified that I will have to live in a world where he doesn't exist? That I won't be enough to keep you from shattering if we lose him?" He flinched as if struck. "But rage is a luxury we cannot afford, Julian," I said, standing and moving around the bed to stand before him. "Alexander doesn't need a CEO. He doesn't need a dominant or a strategist. He needs his father. He needs your strength to be quiet and present and steadfast. Not a weapon but a shield." I reached out and took his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "You told me once you wouldn't let me suffer. Well, I am suffering. And so are you. So stop building new walls between us. The fortress is already breached. The only thing left to protect is each other." The dam broke. A single, silent tear traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. Then another. He didn't sob, but the quiet, shuddering release was more devastating than any outburst. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine, his hands coming up to clutch my wrists. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, the admission costing him everything. "We learn," I said softly. "Together." That moment marked a turning point. Julian didn't magically transform into a placid, accepting figure. The fear was still there, a constant, grim companion. But he stopped fighting the medical team. He began to listen, to ask questions instead of issuing demands. He still transferred obscene amounts of money into research, but now it was focused, collaborative. He found his own way to be present. He learned how to carefully hold Alexander through the maze of 4 lines. He read him stories in a low, steady voice that seemed to soothe our son more than any lullaby. He became an expert at the mind-numbing, essential tasks, tracking medication schedules, monitoring fever spikes, ensuring I ate and slept. Our dynamic shifted once more, but this time into something deeper, more profound. The power exchange that had defined our relationship receded, replaced by a partnership of pure, gritty endurance. We were two soldiers in the same trench, taking turns standing watch, sharing the weight of a fear too heavy for one person to carry. The chemotherapy was a brutal marathon. There were terrifying nights of spiking fevers and septic scares. There were small, precious victories. A day without nausea, a fleeting, genuine smile from Alexander. We celebrated them with the fervor of a major corporate acquisition. Through it all, the Phoenix Foundation continued its work. I managed it from the hospital room, a bittersweet reminder of a world where survival was possible, where lives could be rebuilt. It was my own small act of defiance against the chaos. After what felt like an eternity, the end of the first, most intensive phase of treatment arrived. Alexander was weak and thin, his head bald, but the cancer was in remission. The word itself felt like a benediction, a fragile gift. The day we were allowed to bring him home was overcast, but it felt like the sun was shining directly on us. Julian carried Alexander, wrapped in a soft blanket, across the threshold of the estate as if he were carrying the most priceless, fragile treasure in the world. Grandma Eleanor was waiting, her face streaked with tears, her assistants discreetly absent. We settled Alexander into his crib. He fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted but safe in the familiar, quiet comfort of his own room. Julian and I stood side by side, watching him sleep. The silence between us was no longer lonely, but shared, a quiet monument to the battle we had endured. He turned to me, his eyes clear for the first time in months. The storm had passed, and while the landscape was scarred, it was still standing. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "He is not a vulnerability. He is the source of all my strength." He took my hand, his grip firm and sure. "And so are you." The crucible of our son's illness had not broken us. It had tempered us. It had burned away the last vestiges of the people we used to be, the ruthless billionaire and the vengeful, and forged us into something new, a family. The balance of power was irrelevant now. We were simply one. The years that followed Alexander's recovery were not a return to what was before, but an evolution into something richer, more deeply rooted. The memory of his illness was a permanent landmark in our lives, a somber reminder of our fragility that paradoxically made us stronger. We no longer took a single day of laughter, a single night of peaceful sleep for granted. Julian kept his promise. He did not retreat back into the cold fortress of his isolation. Instead, he channeled the same ferocious intensity he once reserved for business and for me into being a father. He was present in a way his own father never could be. He coached Alexander's little league team, his towering, intimidating figure patiently teaching a group of 7-year-olds how to hold a bat. He attended every school play, his face so often a mask of impenetrable calm, beaming with unvarnished pride. Our son grew into a thoughtful, observant child with my calculating eyes and Julian's quiet intensity. He was resilient, the shadow of his early battle lending a depth to his character that was unusual in one so young. He understood on some instinctive level the unique fabric of his family. He never questioned the fact that his father, who could silence a room with a glance, would kneel without a word to tie his son's shoelaces. The power dynamics of our marriage settled into a comfortable, deeply understood rhythm. The basement was still our sanctuary, a private world where we could shed the skins of CEO and chairman, of mother and father, and simply be Alara and Julian. But the play was different now. It was less about conquest and more about communion, a reaffirmation of the absolute trust that had been tested in fire and sickness and had held firm. It was the language we used to say, "I am yours and you are mine," and that is the one unshakable truth in this universe. When Alexander was 10, I found myself pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only a quiet, profound joy. Julian's reaction was not one of terror but of awed reverence. He attended every appointment, his hand holding mine, his questions for the obstetrician thoughtful and calm. The man who had fainted was gone, replaced by a steady, unwavering pillar of support. The birth of our daughter, Isabel, was a peaceful, scheduled event. Julian was by my side throughout, his gaze fixed on mine, a silent conversation passing between us. When they placed her in my arms, a tiny, perfect creature with a dusting of fair hair and a determined little mouth, I looked at Julian and saw a peace in his eyes I had never seen before. The ghost of his mother had finally been laid to rest. The thorn line continues, Grandma Eleanor whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face as she held her great-granddaughter. And it is stronger than ever. With Isabel's birth, a chapter truly closed. The last echoes of my first life, the lingering embers of resentment and the need for vengeance, were extinguished. I was no longer the woman who had been wronged, reborn to set the score right. I was simply Elara Vansthorn, a mother, a wife, a powerhouse in the business world and a quiet philanthropist. The Phoenix Foundation had grown into a formidable force, saving countless lives from the kind of darkness I had known. That was my real revenge, not on individuals but on the very circumstances that created them. One autumn evening, with the leaves turning to fire outside the windows, we sat as a family in the library. Alexander, now a serious teenager, was helping a giggling Isabel with her homework. Julian and I sat together on the sofa, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder. It was a scene of such ordinary, profound contentment that it almost brought tears to my eyes. "I have a question," Alexander said, looking up from Isabel's math book. His tone was carefully casual, the one he used when he was about to ask something significant. "Yes, my love," I said. He looked between Julian and me. "I've always wondered, how did the two of you know? I mean, it wasn't an arranged marriage, not really. But it wasn't exactly a normal courtship either." Julian and I exchanged a glance. A universe of understanding passed between us in that single look. The memory of a blown-apart past, a wedding day fiasco, a basement, a sickness, a love that had been tested in every conceivable way. Julian answered first, his voice a soft rumble. "I knew," he said, his eyes on me, "the moment she showed me she wasn't afraid. The moment she refused to be my victim and decided instead to be my equal." I smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "And I knew," I added, looking at our son, "when I realized that his strength wasn't in his power to command, but in his courage to surrender." Alexander considered this, his young brow furrowed as he processed the paradox. Isabel, too young to understand the depth of it, simply giggled. "Daddy's silly." Julian laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the room. He leaned over and scooped her up, kissing her cheek. "Yes, I am, my darling. For your mother, I am very, very silly." Later, after the children were asleep, Julian and I walked through the moonlit gardens. The air was crisp, the silence between us comfortable and deep. "He asked a good question," Julian mused, his hand finding mine. "He's a perceptive boy. He gets that from you." He stopped, turning to face me. The moonlight silvered his hair and cast his sharp features in soft relief. "Elara," he said, his voice serious now, "I need you to know something. That day in the hospital when you told me to stop building walls, you saved me. You saved all of us." I looked up at him, this man who had been my monster, my student, my partner, and the love of my life. "We saved each other, Julian. That's the only way it works." He nodded, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "I would do it all again, you know. Every moment of pain, every second of fear. To end up here with you with them. Even being blown apart by my sister?" I asked, a wry smile on my lips. "Especially that," he said without a trace of humor. "Because it brought me you. Not the you everyone else sees. The real you. The one who was forged in that fire." He was right. The woman I was now was not the naive heiress of my first life, nor the vengeful of my second beginning. I was a synthesis of all of it. The pain, the power, the love, the loss. I had rewritten my fate not by erasing the past, but by integrating it, by making it the foundation of a future I had chosen for myself. We stood there for a long time under the vast, star-dusted sky, two flawed, powerful people who had carved out a world for themselves. The legacy we would leave was not just the vast corporate empire or the philanthropic foundation. It was this. A love that was as fierce and unyielding as we were, a family built not on blood alone, but on chosen loyalty and hard-won understanding. No more second chances were needed. This life, with all its chaos and its perfect, quiet moments, was not just enough. It was everything. The end.